Great to see you all. Oh, we remembered to record. Thank you very much, Chris. That's fantastic. Wow, well, it's great to see everybody here. My name is Eric Shulga. I am the vice chair of the Hampshire Democrats, and we are here tonight with a number of distinguished guests, including Senator Deborah Altshuler, Representative David Muse, Zandra Rice Hawkins from Gun Sense, New Hampshire, as well as Representative Mike Edgar, Ward Galanis, and Carly Berriant right here. Or as the kids and I call here at home, she's a Dr. Select Mom, Carly Danger Berriant. So here she is too. We're going to take a look here at a graphic on the next slide that's going to help us understand the state of gun laws here in New Hampshire, because that is the topic for this evening. As you can see, we rank 39th out of 50 in terms of the relative strength of our gun laws. And while we are a bit of an outlier when it comes to our gun violence rate compared to some of our illustrious peers there on that list, you can see that in states where officials take action to pass common sense gun laws, fewer people die by gun violence. So sensible laws make us all safer. Let's take a look at the next slide of tonight's agenda, and then we can get oriented and get started. So we're going to start here with some testimonials from Representative Mike Edgar, Ward, and then Carly. And then we will take a quick poll to see how we all think New Hampshire's doing in terms of gun violence. We'll hear a lay of the land on gun violence in New Hampshire from Zandra Rice Hawkins, Director of Gun Sense New Hampshire, which is a project of Granite State Progress and all the wonderful work that they do. And then we'll hear about some gun violence prevention legislative efforts from Representative Muse and Senator Altshuler. Both of them have been leading the charge in Concord to pass common sense gun legislation that protects New Hampshire residents. So we'll hear from them about what they're doing and what we can do to get involved and support that effort. And then you'll hear a little bit from Ward and I about a call to action in terms of what we can do to get ourselves ready and positioned to pass some of these laws and also win back majorities in Concord so that we can make sure that we keep New Hampshire residents safe. And then we'll hopefully have some time for a Q&A, provided that we all keep to our brief remarks, share really interesting and concise things with our guests tonight. So I'm going to turn it over to Mike now for some brief remarks and a testimonial about his experience on this issue. Mike, thanks for being here. What do you got for us?
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, I just wanted to mention to people that I was in the service for quite a while, about 26 with the Navy almost, and a couple with the Army. So I had a lot of training in, with weapons over the years. Just wanted to mention that to begin with. And I have a lot of weapons also, but they're unbelievably secured. New Hampshire's, gun laws, can be strengthened, to provide a safer environment for us. I believe there's no single rule or procedure that would make our state safer, but that a combination of them could increase our safety of our children, safety of everybody. Some of those things are obtaining guns, gun sales, background checks. That's always a big question. And sometimes it's even hard to track what is actually being done with it, at least for me, because they go through all these different steps. And then at the end, they never get, they don't get actually signed off. Storage of guns is a big issue with me, and it's really a real safety issue for a lot of people. I just think they should be really, really secure, except for access to the owner. And that's any place, whether it's depending on where they are, but mostly in the home. So I think that's where most of the weapons are. Concealed carry is a big issue with me. I have a permit to conceal carry, but I've had a lot of training for it, even some specialized training. But I think that the requirement should be reinstated. Some people don't remember it. I think the very first bill that Governor Sununu signed when he first got in was to make it so that anybody in the world can carry a gun here concealed. Any state, anybody. I think that's nuts myself. I'm not really against necessarily, train people who have experience. I personally don't have a problem with them carrying in most places, not in areas that I think should be restricted also. But but in general. But to have it so that anybody can is, I think, it's really far out. It's hard to believe. And if you are going to get a permit, I think it should be like some other states where they have to be suitably trained to carry concealed. That could be from a concealed carry course like 6 Hour gives, or by some extensive military training or police training. Those are my feelings on it, and that's actually pretty much what I wrote up when I first started running. And when you have these Hampton Union questionnaires, and I pretty much have repeated that every time. And I do realize that a lot of details would have to be worked out to actually try to implement some of the stuff that I just mentioned, but I think it would be really worthwhile. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to speak on this issue.
Thank you very much, Mike. It really carries a lot of weight given your military service and also your long service to Hampton and the deep respect that you have in the community from not just Democratic voters, but independents and Republicans as well. So it means a lot to hear that from you. Thank you. We're going to hear from Ward now. Ward Galanis, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us tonight. And don't forget to unmute. Ward.
Now I'm unmuted. Yeah. I first encountered the NRA when I was like 12 years old, went to a hunter safety class at Camp Carpenter in Londonderry, New Hampshire. And I've been working with guns for years, not thousands of years, but on and off. Took ROTC in college, and most recently attended 6 Hour training classes at the 6 Hour Pro Academy. I'm a life member of the NRA, and I believe in its original mission to promote hunter safety, gun safety, and all of that. However, I think they've gone astray. And I should be able to have a 105mm howitzer in my backyard. That's hyperbole, but that's where I'm at on that. But Mike is right. I had a permit to carry concealed. I let that go because, well, they said you don't need a permit. And I was asked once by a friend, "Are you carrying now?" Very excited voice. And I said, "No, because I haven't been trained to carry." All of these things from a training perspective, you need to be trained and educated on how to use firearms safely. That's job one. However, some of the things that we've seen have to, we need to make a change, because I don't want New Hampshire to become a big headline in the New York Times with someone shooting up a school or anything like that. My niece and nephew live across the street from Sandy Hook when it went down. I think that's enough said there.
Well, thank you very much, Ward. I mean, I think that really helps put in perspective the fact that while we may be an outlier in terms of gun violence, we still are left deeply vulnerable because our legislators in Concord haven't been able to pass bills to protect us from the unfortunate events that we see happening around the rest of the country.
And the thing is, it's not if, it's when it happens.
Right.
We don't want it to happen if we can possibly help it.
Thank you. So now we've got Carly here, who's going to speak to you a little bit about from her perspective as, well, I'll let you take it.
I mean, you're also the parent of our children, so you can chime in if you need to. Hi, everybody. I am Carly Bryant. I have 2 kids here in Hampton. I'm also on our town's Board of Selectmen. And what I'll say is that there is a lot that you can do to prepare to have kids, especially during a pandemic. You get your car seat, you get your little masks, you get your vaccines. There's nothing though that prepares you from getting a call from your kid's preschool that the school is on lockdown because there's someone with a gun near the campus. And I wish I could say that happened one time. Actually, I wish I could say that it has never happened. or that happened once, but it's happened more than 4 times. I wish I could say that, you know, there's a way to prepare for that day when your kid gets off the school bus and after telling you about how great music class was, they mentioned that they have a friend who's planning on bringing a gun to school the next day. I think that's absolutely bonkers, and that's not the world I want my kids to grow up in. It's not the world we deserve to live in. And I'm really enthusiastic about bringing about some change so that the people who come after us, so that my kids don't have to have their kids in this kind of a world. It is absolutely absurd that we don't have a law in the state of New Hampshire that prevents people from the public from bringing a gun into a school. I think that's ridiculous. And so I'm here as a parent who is really tired of grieving all of the kids who have died, all of the people who have died from gun violence in the state of New Hampshire and from guns produced here in New Hampshire. And I think that we need to bring about a change. So that is me.
Well, thank you, Carly. I just second everything that she said, and she captured my feelings exactly as well. Thank you. So I see, Xandra, you're nodding along, and it sounds like a lot of that was resonating with you as you were listening. And you have so much expertise and experience in this area. So we're really excited to hear from you next. And you can let us all know a little bit more about what the state of play looks like here in New Hampshire.
Eric, I'm sorry, excuse me, but this is Chris. We were going to do a quick poll.
Oh, yeah.
yes.
Sorry, I got so excited watching Xandra nod.
Sorry, I preempted the
Carly was talking. Let's do that poll. And then once that's over, we're going to hear from you, Xandra.
So we're going to put up 6 questions, give you all a chance to answer those questions. And if I am not completely technologically impaired, I'll be able to show you the results, and then we'll go into a follow-up discussion. So here is the poll. Hopefully everybody can see that.
Looks great, Chris. We're going to participate now.
We'll take about 5 or so minutes. So we have 2 outliers. I shamed one of them. There we go. Okay, we have 100% participation. I'm going to end the poll, and we'll show the results.
That's a better completion rate than the students in 8th grade doing the homework I assigned them. So that's good.
So we didn't rehearse this, but Eric, perhaps we could ask you know, our subject matter experts to maybe just touch on each of the results in these polls. Tell us how accurate they are or not.
Sure. Xandra, can you see the results?
I can, yeah.
Fantastic.
So,
Go ahead.
yeah, I'll go ahead and jump in with the poll. So does New Hampshire require any person who carries a concealed firearm in public to first obtain a permit? It does not. The first law Governor Sununu signed into, or the first bill Governor Sununu signed into law repealed our concealed carry license requirement. So when Mike and Ward were talking a minute ago about whether or not they needed that, you used to have that, and the police chief or the select board could deny that if you were a person with a history of, say, getting into a lot of bar fights, had been suspected of domestic violence several times, was known as a little bit of a hothead around town, other things that may, kind of alarm people to know that you had a concealed carry firearm, and that law or that policy went away. The police chiefs protested it. They said they had several examples of times people should not be carrying concealed, but Sununu did sign that repeal into law. I was actually going to share this in the my remarks, but I actually got a concealed carry license a few years back after that law passed, with no training on firearms, had never shot a firearm, had never purchased a firearm, had never gone through training. And I had to fill out the form, and it said, for what purpose do you seek a concealed carry license? And I used the line from the legislation, for any lawful purpose. And I received a concealed carry license just like that. And the only thing that they do is a background check. So that is a major gap in our laws. The second one are guns permitted at the State House or demonstrations. Fun fact, you cannot carry in a sign into the State House gallery, but you can be armed. And this has gone back and forth over the years, depending on which Democrats or Republicans are in the majority, about whether or not guns are allowed in the State House and in the gallery, but they are right now. Third, are guns permitted in K through 12 schools? This is a little bit of a trick question. Under federal law, they are not. And under state law, we have no state law around gun-free schools. So students are not allowed to bring firearms in, but the law is silent on community members, parents, and others. So we're spending all this money to lock down our schools and to harden our schools with all these school security measures. But under the law, an individual can carry a firearm into the school. And what's worse is they've made it so that state and local police it's a chilling effect from a law, another law Sununu signed, about not enforcing, investigating, or cooperating with federal firearms policies that are not reflected in state law. So I have to say that the Gun Violence Prevention Coalition, which you'll hear about in a second, has done a great job of really putting pressure on the Sununu administration to have to issue not one, but 2 attorney general's memos now about how that law is supposed to work and keep our kids safe if teachers and school administrators and students report a firearm, and the state and local police are not supposed to tell somebody that they have to leave the building with that firearm. But that is a huge gap as well. Eric, were you jumping in for that piece of it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I posted a link in the chat with an article about what Xandra was just referencing.
The fourth one, how old must someone in New Hampshire be to purchase an assault rifle? So this one's also a little bit of a trick question where we look at state and federal law. So just so you know, under state law, and I'm going to go my notes so I don't mix this up, you need to be, to purchase a handgun under federal law, you need to be 18. To purchase a long gun, sorry, let me say this again. New Hampshire provides no minimum age for the possession of firearms, and it doesn't penalize the sale of a long gun to a minor, although federal restrictions still apply. So we have a mix of laws around which type of firearm, what age, whether the federal or state law enforcement can oversee that. And there's a difference too between selling the firearm and possessing the firearm. So there are some penalties around selling those firearms to younger aged individuals, but not for that younger aged individual to be in possession of a firearm. So just all over the board, we've got gaps back and forth in these pieces. And I'm going to drop into the chat just an article that helps kind of go through those, because it's, like I said, there's several different pieces depending on whether it's possession or ownership or transfer. And then number 5, are domestic abusers barred from having guns while subject to restraining orders? One bright spot in our gun violence prevention policies is that we do actually have generally better laws around domestic abusers. And New Hampshire actually has been thankfully had closed some of the loopholes that had existed at the federal level, even before the most recent gun violence prevention measures that took place under the Biden administration. So we're doing a little bit better there. And then are gun buyers required to wait a prescribed time before completing a purchase? No, they are not. And we have had legislation up several times around waiting periods. The pieces of legislation have varied between 3 to 7 days, but there is evidence that particularly for those who are in a moment of crisis, so if we talk about like suicide prevention, having 24 hours to 72 hours to a week where they have to stop and think, that mental health crisis may pass and they won't actually go through with the act of committing of suicide by firearm. Suicide by firearm is uniquely lethal, so it's really important that you have a little bit of time there. It is less likely that somebody will be able to be saved after that. It's also a cooling off period, so individuals who may be considering a mass shooting and other impulsive acts of violence, putting a little time between the purchase and delivery of a firearm also gives them a chance to either have that time period to cool down, to get better on more stable ground, or for somebody else to intervene and help prevent that from happening. Anybody surprised by their responses and by the answers? Yeah. I think we get a lot of surprises around the gun-free schools. A lot of people don't realize that we don't have a gun-free schools law. And I'll tell you, when we first started organizing way back in 2009, I met with some longtime gun violence prevention advocates, and the first thing they told me is, there's no gun-free schools law. Don't ever talk about it, because not a lot of people knew, and they didn't want people to be encouraged by knowing the absence of the law to actually carry firearms in schools. But unfortunately, the gun lobby has tried to push even farther, and so now the cat's out of the bag, and we've actually seen gun lobby groups host trainings on your right to carry a firearm into our K-12 schools and encourage people. So I think that's a good start to who am I and what am I doing here? So I will let Chris pull up the slideshow for us. And while he's getting that ready, so as you heard, I work on gun policy. My name is Xander Rice-Hawkins. I'm the director of Gun Sense New Hampshire, which is a project to grant state progress and engage New Hampshire. Actually, if you want to go back to the other side, yeah, there you go. In 2009, our organization started to work on gun violence prevention, and the reason we started to do that was because we work primarily, our larger organization really works on progressive communications and research. We were doing a lot of work at the State House, and we realized that there were not many voices for public safety there. And so we started to, with a very modest goal, we're talking 15 years ago, to just have 1 or 2 voices in the room in favor of public safety. And at that time, there were several gun lobby groups, and there still are. There's 5 to 6 different types of gun lobby groups here at the state level. So NRA affiliates and other kind of splintered chapters of different gun lobby groups. And over the years, as we got more organized, and unfortunately, as gun violence continued to grow in our state and nation, we became a more formal coalition. You can see some of our coalition partners listed here. So we work very closely with Everytown or Moms Demand Action, the Giffords Campaign, Kent Street Coalition locally, Newcastle Promise, the Campaign to Keep Guns Off Campus. We're working a lot more closely with New Hampshire Council of Churches and various faith communities in some of our initiatives, and continuing to work at the State House with a variety of partners, including NAMI New Hampshire and others around particular bills. So I'll go ahead and go to the next slide. We do this work because, as we all know, gun violence is a public health crisis in our country. Firearms are now the leading cause of death for American children. More than 2/3 of school shooters acquired their firearms in their tax either from their own home or that of a relative. We talk about safe storage and teaching our next generation about firearms and safety. Over 75% of firearms used in youth suicide attempts, and unintentional firearm injuries also came from the resident of the victim, a relative, or a friend. In New Hampshire, we lose around 145 people every year to gun violence. So that's a lot for a small state. 90% of New Hampshire suicides are gun suicides. That's twice the national average. And more than half of New Hampshire homicides involve a firearm. So you're going to look at these rankings and you're going to say, boy, our gun laws are really, really weak. You can see our composite score. And our gun violence rate is not great. It's 10.1 per 100,000 residents. But we're lower than the national average. And the gun lobby will say, that's because of all the guns we have here. But the truth is, we're a more rural state, and we have a lot of things going for us in terms of community services, but we do not, the presence of firearms in our community is causing real harm, and real families are being impacted every day. The Giffords Coalition ranks us at a D- on their annual gun loss scorecard. Every town also has a ranking that puts us about the same place. We'll go to the next slide. And this is the urgency of our work. I talked about some of the national numbers and some of the state data. These are headlines just from the last several months in New Hampshire, plus the one from last year, from the credible school shooting in Portsmouth the year previous. So we've had credible school shooting threats in our state. Most people know about what happened in Portsmouth, where an individual went to the school, posted on social media about a potential school shooting, had an AR-15, firearms and ammunition in the car. But this is not the only credible school shooting threat we've had here. We were sitting in a committee room a year and a half ago and listened to law enforcement and school administrators talk about a particular school shooting threat where they actually had apprehended youth, and this one had never made the news. And we were shocked, even as advocates for gun violence prevention who follow closely what's happening in the state. And you just think about that one instance and how many more times that thankfully something's been stopped. And that's kind of our job, is to help make those things, prevent those things from happening or getting to the point where we have to scare our children or scare our families that there might be a threat. Unfortunately, one that we weren't so lucky about, the shooting at New Hampshire Hospital here in Concord in November, where we lost a member of law enforcement, and where the shooter themselves ended up losing their life in that as well. Somebody with a history of mental health crisis who clearly needed help. And I know that sounds odd to say, give a moment for the shooter as well, but he was also in crisis. That's not a logical decision for somebody to make. And the security guard who was killed was former police chief Bradley Haas. Now the state is spending a lot of money on a private security firm there. They have reinforced the building. They're bringing firearms into the hospital setting, which is of concern for patients and family members. But what they're not doing is actually addressing the root causes of gun violence or the easy access. We don't know yet how that shooter got their firearm, but they shouldn't have been able to receive one. And we have active legislation that should have barred them if they went to a gun store. Representative Muse will talk about that legislation here in a minute. Other incidents over the last couple of weeks: gun fired in the Mall of New Hampshire parking lot in Manchester a couple of weeks ago. We just had a story following up on a 2016 shooting where somebody who should have had their records reported to the gun line to prevent them from being able to purchase a firearm because of a mental health crisis. That wasn't reported properly. That individual went to a gun store. The gun store staff recognized that something was off, but they couldn't get a denial from the gun line, the background check system. So they proceeded with the sale, and that individual shot 2 police officers. Thankfully, they survived, but they've been in ongoing litigation with the state to try to force some changes in accountability. Nashua School District had lockdown with firearms. Last week, a man charged in the death of a woman shot in an apartment in Conway. So these are headlines that people all see come across their desk, but in each of these situations, there are probably a myriad of policies that could have helped or prevent or slowed down the potential for gun violence in our community. Next one. And next slide.
While we're waiting for Chris to advance. Oh, there we go. Got it.
So I'm gonna jump up for a second because we're gonna get into like what are we doing about it and what are the policies we know that would help in these situations. So I'm gonna start with the first half. I'm gonna talk about some of the federal action that's happened, and then I'm actually gonna turn it over to my co-presenters, Senator Deborah Altschiller and Representative David Muse, to talk a little bit about what's been happening at the state level with legislation. And then we'll wrap up with talking about a couple of things that we're doing outside the State House, because part of our work is blocking bad gun lobby bills and building momentum and support to pass proactive gun violence prevention legislation. And so we are also working out in the community to try to build bigger, broader support and service to those. So we do have some great news at the federal level. The Biden administration has been really great and proactive. In June of 2022, they passed the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. In 2023, they established the White House Office of Gun Violence Prevention. This is the first time that the White House has ever had an Office of Gun Violence Prevention. And not only did they start that, they actually put in charge of it two leaders from the gun violence prevention movement, both who have personal experience with gun violence. One who lost a family member to a shooting, and another who had been shot himself and has gone through what the aftermath of surviving a shooting is. And they're really embedded in a lot of our national movement work, and we're very excited to have that office. And I will tell you, they are hustling. We have been on several calls with them. They are looking to help states improve their potential to pass legislation, but they're also doing a lot of things to help communities in the aftermath of crisis. So Lewiston, Maine was actually the first time that the White House Office of Gun Violence Prevention activated. And it's hard to believe that this is true, but for everything we know about like FEMA response and hurricanes and all the national resources that go in, there was no national rapid response plan for shootings, for mass shootings. And so the Biden administration, both what you see them doing proactively in front of the camera, but also quietly behind the scenes, is starting to set up the infrastructure to better support communities in those moments, including very basic things like victim services, so that families, you have incidents of gun violence where families can't afford a funeral, and they are in the national spotlight trying to deal with everything else and literally trying to afford to bury their family member. So from top to bottom, we've been so appreciative of the White House's efforts and really thinking about what local communities need. In December of 2023, they rolled out the Safer States Initiative. So this is one Representative Muse will talk a little bit more about towards the end of the legislative piece, but it's trying to help support and provide a springboard for states as well. Next slide. So what is in the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act? One of the most exciting pieces is there's a new administrative rule to clarify who's a federally licensed firearms dealer. So when we talk about like the background check system or the gun show loopholes, if you're a federally licensed gun dealer, you have to conduct a background check whenever, wherever you do a gun sale. So whether or not you're at your physical store, if you're doing it online, if you're at a gun show, you have to do that background check. But we have a lot of unlicensed dealers, those who haven't met the high bar to make selling firearms the majority of their income, but they're definitely doing it for income. They're doing it regularly. They're not doing background checks, and they're selling to people unknown to them. So we've been trying to close that by requiring everybody to conduct a background check if you do a sale or transfer of a firearm. Another way that the Biden administration is doing this, and this has been at the request of Gabby Giffords and a lot of national gun violence prevention advocates, is to redefine what it means to be a dealer. And so this new set of rules under the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Bureau actually says if you're regularly selling firearms for a profit, even if it's not your main source of income, if they have like how many you have to sell per year and the types of firearms and the types of exchanges, you actually need to become a federally licensed dealer. And this is huge. And as you can imagine, the gun lobby has put in a lawsuit, or I should say they've put in 3 lawsuits around it now. And just last week, the Attorney General for New Hampshire signed on to one of those lawsuits. So our Attorney General to the new administration is trying to undermine this really critical advancement we're making, and we'll be following that as that goes through litigation. But this is really a great step forward if we can make sure that it upholds in the courts, and we believe strongly that it will. A couple other things. $750 million in support for state crisis intervention, including extreme risk protection orders. Senator Altshuler will talk a little bit about what that policy is. Protections for victims of domestic violence and dating relationships. Under 21 enhanced review process. So we know that for particularly for mass shooters or school shooters, that age set between 16 and 21 is a really critical age, and having more barriers around access to certain types of high capacity firearms is a critically important initiative. More penalties for straw purchasing. So if somebody approaches me and they can't purchase a firearm, but they know that I could clear a background check and ask me to purchase it for them, that type of straw purchase, there'll now be enhanced penalties for that. And then $250 million in violence interruption funding. And this is a really amazing program. And I will say all states got some funding for it, but one of the ways I've seen it play out most effectively are in states like Maryland, where they are literally going into high gun violence communities, and they are working with families and with individuals, and they are doing things like running youth programs. They are for kids who were swept up into gang activity, actually relocating families in some cases, like if they really just that kid cannot be in that environment anymore. This is like really getting at the roots of some of the gun violence and some of those other areas. Really, really critical and innovative work happening. So we're excited. The Biden administration is doing its job. It's showing up. I talked to Joe Biden when he was in the state month and a half ago, and I thanked him for his work on this act. And I will say he stopped and he pulled my hand in closer and he said, "We're going to get the assault weapons ban passed. I'm committed to this." And so I truly believe that they are looking out for our best interest, and we've got more good things coming. So with that, I'm going to turn it over. Senator Altshuler, are you in a place where you can kick off the next slide, or would you like? Oh, yep, you are. Perfect.
And before Senator Altshuler jumps in here, I was curious, Sandra, with this federal legislation, are there aspects of that legislation that New Hampshire cannot enforce because Sununu signed a law forbidding us from enforcing federal gun law?
Yeah, that is an excellent question. So when you look at those ERPO dollars, for example, we don't have an extreme risk protection order policy. Down in DC, part of the negotiations was allowing, frankly, Republican-led states to use that money for some other types of activities. So we'll get some, but we won't have the best use of those dollars that we would like to see. And we've had to check around each of these things, like the new administrative rule. We had to work with our national legal support at some of our partners and say, are we going to be able to benefit from this? Luckily, so far, we have been able to because of the federal piece, but it still doesn't mean that state and local law enforcement can enforce some of these pieces, and that's a problem. And I'll let Senator Altshuler kick us off with the state legislation and how we've been prioritizing the legislation that we work on proactively.
Thank you, Sandra. Thank you. And I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you all tonight about this really important and really difficult work that we are doing at the Concord level, and how we can engage all together a little bit better too. I want to highlight why certain bills are prioritized. There there are so many gaps in fact, I hesitate to say gap. We have a wide open field when it comes to doing any gun violence prevention legislation in New Hampshire. So it's almost like we're starting fresh, because we sincerely have the smallest of protections in front of us. So we could, at the beginning of every legislative session, probably submit 50 bills that would create those layers of support and protection for doing gun violence prevention work. However, I don't know that anybody has the physical and mental capacity to follow 50 bills through the legislature. It is a lot of work. And so we have to be choosy about what it is we're going to put forward. And how we do that is we evaluate, will this bill provide the most preventative protection to address violence and suicide prevention? That is a major focus in the legislature, because our suicide rate has grown exponentially. It was really, really high, 26% above the national average pre-COVID. So we are not doing well in terms of suicide prevention. And with a state where we have a really, really high population of veterans, and veterans have a particular vulnerability, we know, we want to provide as many opportunities for suicide prevention as possible. We want to know that we have capacity, that we have the people power to bring this through both bodies, through the House, through the Senate, and then keep advocating for it to get to the governor's desk. And we also are looking at bills that we have had success with. So when I first started doing this work in the House 8 years ago, we were a very, very small minority of people who were saying we should be doing gun violence prevention out loud. It was kind of like the conversation around broad-based taxes. It was a political, a way to deflate your entire agenda as a member of the House or the Senate would be to take up gun violence prevention bills. However, there has been a groundswell of support, like in Democratic committees, Moms Demand Action, Everytown, Sandy Hook Promise, and that groundswell has been growing. I think we're ready for the next slide. And so we passed bills. We've actually passed bills. Oh, I'm going to just put a pin in this for a second. We have passed background checks. We have passed extreme risk protection orders. We have passed 3-day waiting periods, and the governor has vetoed them. So we've already demonstrated that we can get these bills passed. What we need now is we need more allies in the House and the Senate, and we need a new governor. Fortunately, our governor is stepping aside, and we really, really, really don't want Kelly Ayotte to be in the position of vetoing all these bills that we're going to send to the corner office. So here are the bills that we are working on, or have been working on. I am going to ask for Representative David Muse, my colleague in the House, because this is his bill.
Yeah,
for
hi,
him
David.
yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
So 1711 is the first core gun violence prevention bill that's been passed out of the New Hampshire House of Representatives when the Republican majority has been in place. And one of the things that made that possible is it actually was a bipartisan bill. So Terry Roy, who's the Republican chairman of the Criminal Justice and Public Safety Committee, approached me after the New Hampshire hospital shooting and asked me if I'd be willing to work on the bill with him. And I think one of the reasons why he asked me to work on the bill with him is he actually knew I would work on the bill with him. I actually write a lot of legislation, and when I write legislation, I do my homework. And part of doing the homework on this particular bill was making sure that we didn't further marginalize people who are already pretty marginalized, people who are in mental health crisis. So we worked with NAMI New Hampshire, the New Hampshire Disability Rights Association. And the other thing that we did was we worked very closely with some of the doctors over at New Hampshire Hospital to a point where they were actually giving us input and providing pieces of the bill. So that was a little bit of a different experience for us. But one of the things that came out of that as a result is we had a very, very good idea how we needed to structure the bill. So ATF would actually approve this. So what the bill actually will do and the gap that it closes is currently New Hampshire is one of only 3 states that doesn't allow mental health records of people who've been adjudicated for things like involuntary mental health commitments, found guilty by reason of insanity, or not deemed competent to stand trial. We're one of 3 states that does not report that information to the federal firearms background check system. So what this bill would actually do is correct that. There are a whole bunch of requirements for a bill for New Hampshire to actually be able to provide this information to the FBI background checks database. There are a bunch of ATF requirements that we need to meet. So the bill actually needed to be written in a very specific way. And one of the things that was this required is to have what's called a relief from disability process, because unlike being a convicted felon, which you never quite recover from, people do recover from mental illness. And one of the things that's important is to make sure that, once people are capable of owning and possessing firearms, that they can have those rights restored. So that is a key part of the bill as well. I will say that Representative Roy probably worked more carefully on that part of the bill than I did. But there was a lot of very, very good back and forth. And the result was, as we got this one through, criminal justice and public safety 20-0. And we got it through the House. It's now in the hands of the Senate Judiciary Committee. There's already been a hearing. We're just sort of waiting to see what they do with it. We understand that they may be voting on it either tomorrow or on Wednesday, making a recommendation. We're kind of keeping our fingers crossed that they leave it alone because there are folks on the Judiciary Committee on the Republican side who do like to put their fingerprints on bills like this. And unfortunately, if they put their fingerprints on it in the wrong way, the ATF could reject it. And we could remain one of 3 states in the country that actually haven't added this to their process. But we're very, very close. And I also wanted to just call out the work that Xandra did in essentially reaching out to the doctors at New Hampshire Hospital, making sure that they were involved in the process. And really just sort of setting up and making it possible for me and for Representative Roy to do our work extremely quickly. We actually filed this as a late bill. And from the time we started working on it until the time it was done, I think we had, I don't know, what was it, Xander, maybe about 10 or 11, maybe 12 days from start to finish. To actually get this bill in. And then we needed to convince the Rules Committee to give us an exemption. So there's been a lot of drama around this particular one. So fingers crossed, we can actually keep this one in the success file. Next slide. So an important part of what we do, it's not just passing good bills like enhanced background checks and 3-day waiting periods. It's also stopping the numerous attempts that we see every single term to actually take us backward with our gun laws. So one of the things that was interesting, and what was interesting about this HB 1701, this was a bill that actually would have required annulling mental health records following involuntary commitments. And there were basically all kinds of issues with it. And the biggest issue was it was in direct conflict with the relief from disability process that we outlined in 1711. That was one that we managed to successfully kill. There was another bill, 144, that would have restored firearms rights to felons who are convicted of nonviolent crimes. One of the things to be aware of when you hear that is there tend to be a lot more white people who are convicted of nonviolent crimes and people in minorities. So this is sort of in addition to simply not being a good idea, it's also just sort of one of the ways that if we're not careful how we change the law, we can change it in ways that disadvantage people who are minorities. 1064 is something that we've seen several times in my term in the House, and these are basically out and out attacks on our domestic violence law. So this particular one would have prohibited police from actually seizing weapons after violation of a protective order. And it's just like, gee, if you're going to seize weapons at any point, that would seem to be the time you would want to seize them. Next slide. 1337 was one that was opposed by the Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence. Would have changed the burden of proof basically to the victim for return of firearms after a protective order expires. This was a good one, 512. Essentially would have just exempted any New Hampshire firearms manufacturer or ammunition manufacturer from interstate commerce laws and any regulation by the federal government. We were all curious about how we were going to enforce that one. That one was killed. And I think my favorite one of the bad bills this year, and maybe the craziest one, is the one that we called the Killer Robot Bill. But we actually had a representative who filed a bill that wanted to make it make it legal for people to deploy autonomous weapon systems on their property as part of their Second Amendment rights. And those weapons would be able to actually engage targets without human intervention. So basically, killer robots roaming your property, looking for interlopers. And I think that was one that even the Republicans on our committee couldn't kill fast enough. Next slide. So the one still in play, 1711, as I said, is in play. There's another one, 1336, which I call the Take Your Guns to Work bill. This is one that would actually ban employers in the state from having policies that prohibit employees from storing weapons in their cars while they're parked at work. This is something that we fought pretty hard. We didn't get as much I think help from the business community as we thought we were going to get. But this is one that just has all kinds of bad implications. It's basically being sold as a bill like, well, gee, how much harm can a firearm do in a locked car? People want to take their guns, to work because after work they go shooting on the range and things like that. What this does, though, by essentially allowing guns onto private property under this circumstance, it just opens the door to policies that employers have about not carrying guns in the workplace, to also be fair game. So we want to close this door before it opens. HB 1166 is one that is still going through. It's still going through the Senate. It actually passed in the House. That would prohibit assigning merchant codes to firearm purchases. So currently, if you buy a gun at a place like Shooter's Outpost, it shows up as sporting goods. And the reason why these codes, why having a firearms code is good is you can actually see if somebody's made a very large purchase of of firearms or ammunition. The code won't tell you what they've purchased, but it's one more thing that can flag a potential mass shooter or somebody who's going to cause an issue. Next slide. So we've had some losses, and I'm just going to kind of go through a few of these. But in the House in 2023, the school safety zones bill was killed, and some of these bills weren't only just killed; they were killed in such a way that makes it impossible for us to consider the bill later in the session, no matter what happens. So basically, they were what we call indefinitely postponed. So the Republicans not only gave them, you kind of killed them in the conventional way with an inexpedient to legislate recommendation, but some of them were actually indefinitely postponed, which would even keep them from coming back over as Senate bills. So 3-day waiting period was another one. Extreme risk protection order, which is Senator Altschiller's bill from previous sessions. HB 351 was one that I filed, and what this would have done is it would have required firearms that are actually sold, like used firearms, as well as firearms that are sold in really any commercial sale, whether it's inside a gun store or not, to be accompanied by a locking safety device. Currently, when you buy a new firearm in New Hampshire under federal law, they have to sell a locking safety device with the firearm, but not for used firearms and not for the sales that happen between people. The other part of that bill would have been stiffening our firearms negligence law when there's an incident involving children. So currently, and this is something that a lot of people don't know, is if a child gets a hold of a gun and shoots himself, shoots somebody else, the owner of the firearm can only be charged with a crime if the child literally shoots somebody or commits a crime with it or threatens somebody with the firearm. And the crime that they're charged with is a violation, not a felony, not a misdemeanor, but something with a maximum $1,000 fine. So that's our current law in New Hampshire. What my bill would have done is it would have broadened the circumstances under which people could be prosecuted for a negligence violation, and it would have increased the penalties substantially. And that one will be coming back, I promise you. And SB 247 we actually took a crack at that one in the House, but maybe Senator Altschiller, you can kind of explain to us what you were trying to do with that one and what that one was all about.
Sure. Let me call up how it all went down. 47. So right now there is in New Hampshire state statute, there is one industry that has a carve out for limited liability for their products, and that is gun manufacturers. So when a gun manufacturer, and an example that I can use, and I'll throw some of the articles in the chat. Going back a few years, Sig Sauer developed a weapon called the P320, and it is a handgun. And they were marketing this handgun to the United States military to get the military contract for these to be the handguns for everyone in the Army. And so during the due diligence, the Army discovered, and Sig Sauer was aware of, they had a faulty trigger, and the gun actually was going off without provocation, without having been touched, without having been fired, and a number of people were injured from this faulty trigger. So about 5,000 of these guns were manufactured, and the US Army said, you've got to fix this problem. And if you fix this problem, we will put in a massive order, which they did. And so the P320 was redone to meet the Army's requirements. But then Sig Sauer had an enormous amount of product left from the first go round, which now that the Army had taken a contract out for the P320, Sig Sauer was free to tell their customers that this is the gun used by the US military, which then encouraged a number of municipalities nationwide to buy this weapon for their municipal law enforcement. So these guns that were faulty went out into the world, and were used with law enforcement who subsequently were injured, and lots of other people were injured. Now, Sig Sauer, as a New Hampshire company, was not required to put out any sort of recall, safety issue, alert their customers that there was a problem, none of it. And you couldn't sue them because they have they're exempt according to New Hampshire state law. So we would like to repeal that exemption, and also put them in the position of having to let their customers know that they have faulty products. So if you go on the Sig Sauer website, if you are an owner of a P320 and you go on the Sig Sauer website, you may, through other gun enthusiast groups on social media, which is how most people found out about the faulty product, you can go to Sig Sauer, and if you dig through their website, it takes about 2 pages in till you can find it. You can request a retrofit, and they will pay for you to send your firearm to the factory. They will do the retrofit and fix it, and they will send it back to you. But you wouldn't even know that you needed a retrofit and a fix unless you had found out about it through a gun club or a social club that you belong to, or maybe you saw the number of articles about it that have been published about how there are a number of law enforcement agencies suing Sig Sauer to try to get relief from this faulty product. So we are trying to repeal the limited liability that the gun manufacturers enjoy here in New Hampshire. And the P320 is just one example. Okay, next slide.
One of the things that was interesting about that when we made the argument for the same bill in the House this year was I took a look at the statute that actually provides limited liability to firearms manufacturers, and not only are they the only industry that's exempt, but the other folks who actually have this exemption are folks like policemen, they're firefighters, they're people who run food banks. If you go down the list, every single one of them is a person who delivers a public service where periodically there is some risk in there, that people may be harmed by inadvertently by some action that they may take. Right. And so we've decided that it's in the public interest for people conveying these public services to have some limited exemptions from liability law, and to actually include an entire industry that manufactures guns in this in this area of the law just strikes me as one of those, pick the thing that doesn't belong exercises. And afterwards, one of the things that was interesting is Bob Lynn, who's a former Supreme Court justice. He's the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, pretty right-wing gun supporter, came up to me and said, that was a pretty good argument. So I think we're going to use that one again.
Okay, so now we're up to 2024. And like I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, there is a strategy for filing gun violence prevention legislation. So there's a couple of ways, and this is a little inside baseball, and I will make it very, very brief. There are 2 options when you want to file any legislation. If you have a colleague like I do with Representative Muse, who serves in the other body, what we could both do is we could both on the same day introduce legislation to close the background check loophole. Right. So I would file it in the Senate, he would file it in the House, and there would be a hearing in the Senate and a hearing in the House sometime in like January or February. And then the House and the Senate would each individually vote on that. If they both voted to kill it, then we can't bring it back in the second year of the biennium. So last year, we thought that the majority, the House had a close enough number of representatives, and we had some Republicans who would cross over with our arguments, we thought that we might be able to have some success in the House and then send those bills with the wind in their sails over to the Senate. Unfortunately, that strategy didn't work out so great. And so in the first year, a lot of the bills that you see in front of you failed. So I put them through in the Senate. Now, with a 14-10 minority, we're 14-10 in the minority. Did I think that these had a chance of passing? Not particularly. I had hoped that the jolting of the shooting in Concord would have inspired some of my colleagues to really take a hard look at the significant issues that we have, not to mention the real threat that was diverted in Portsmouth and the number of lockdowns. I think every senator has had a credible threat in their district at this point. So we put these bills in, and unfortunately, everything in front of you failed. And the upswing to that is that Xandra and Gun Sense New Hampshire keep a report card, which I think we're going to talk about at the end of the program. So you can see how your legislators voted. And when we all go campaigning this summer, you can hold your legislators or any other legislator you happen to be in conversation with or your friends with, hold them accountable for their votes. So yeah. This is where we are. You can go to the next slide. You've all seen it. And now we are back to Xandra, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I was actually going to have Representative Muse just briefly mention the
David.
states, safer
Yes.
states, and then I'll close out with Guns to Gardens.
Yeah, this is part of when I actually went down to Washington, D.C. in November, and the White House Office of Gun Violence Prevention had kind of a convocation of state legislators. And one of the things that they did was they outlined their plan and really gave us a chance to kind of meet some of the people who are sort of champions for this type of legislation in other states. I was down there with Alexis Simpson, who's our deputy minority leader in the House, and met 6 legislators from Maine who were fresh off the Lewiston shooting, and were still just, I would say, in a state of shock and just stunned, and really trying to figure out how they could put together, the best package of legislation they possibly could. And one of the things that I kind of took away from that is, my God, it's one thing, it's tough enough being a legislator trying to get other legislators to bite on this type of legislation before an incident happens. But, to be in a position where you've had 18 people die, and you look back and there were numerous opportunities over the years, for Maine to pass things like 3-day waiting periods, to toughen up their background check law, to pass a red flag law instead of a yellow flag law. So I think that there were a lot of soul searching and recriminations going on, and it just something that really stuck with me, from that day. But one of the things that is really great for legislators like us is that, with the exception of Xandra and the help that she brings, I mean, to a large extent over the years, legislators who've been fighting this fight have been fighting it by themselves. We have a history of people who put forward random bills. Sometimes the bills are well-intended, but not particularly well-written. This is the first time state legislators are going to get help from anybody in the federal government when it comes to passing laws and improving the situation in their individual states. And one of the biggest things I think that I've seen, and Xandra mentioned this early on, that's actually part of this, is the support for victims and survivors. one of the things we hear all about over and over again are the fatalities from mass shootings, but we don't hear about the people who were wounded and lived and have to live the rest of their lives, you know, with disabilities because of the shooting. We don't hear about their families. We don't hear about whether or not they were able to pick up their lives afterwards. So in addition to supporting legislation and, you know, supporting the good work that happens in places like Concord and Augusta, the fact that there's so much focus on supporting victims and survivors is just something I'm really, really glad to see. So I think we're going to be hearing more about this as time goes on, but I am really grateful for the support that the Biden administration is providing, because they're literally the first administration that we've had that doesn't just wring its hands. They're getting their hands dirty, and they're helping out, and I think that's an incredibly positive sign.
And then we'll just close out this section. So we talked a lot about what happened at the federal level, what happened at the state level, inside the state house. But just so you know, we're also working out in the community. So Representative Muse, Senator Altschiller are doing these presentations all over the state with us. We have teams of folks who are working on faith outreach, public health official outreach, law enforcement outreach. And one program I wanted to share in particular, last year we actually did our first Guns to Gardens project as part of the coalition. And so if you want to flip to that next slide, if you can do so, if you have a firearm in your home and you don't know what to do with it, don't want it any longer, maybe you inherited it, if you bring it to the police department, they actually have to, under state law, by a gun lobby law put in years ago before this coalition existed, they have to sell it, use it in their own work, or store it. And so if you're somebody who doesn't want a high capacity weapon to go back out on the street, or maybe, you know, you just don't want the firearm to be in circulation anymore, there's very few options for us. And one of the things that Guns to Gardens does is we give people an opportunity to do a gun give back or a gun buyback. You may have heard that term, because our police departments don't do those here. We did one. And last June, we collected 31 firearms, including an AR-15 at our first ever event. And we have now turned them into some of these things that you see before us, wooden bowls made by a local artist, some garden tools, and then heart necklaces. And Representative Muse and Senator Altschiller were able to attend a celebration event we did this weekend. They were actually honored for their longstanding work in gun violence prevention at that event. And they received one of these wooden bowls made by a local artisan. And we had a beautiful celebration and auction. I think we'll be continuing to do that. So we're also thinking creatively about, like, how do we talk about public safety, public health, safe storage, removing firearms from your home if you now have young children, or do you need a gun lock through Moms Demand Action's Be Smart training program? Like, really thinking holistically about where families may be, whether or not you can continue to have a firearm in the home or not, and then also working towards public policies that make sure that we're thoughtful about when and where and who has firearms and what type of weapons make sense for our communities and our streets. So this next Guns to Garden collection event is actually Saturday, June 8th. It'll be in the Concord area, and I'll make sure that Chris and the team have the information for anybody who would like to help share about that. And if you would like to get involved in any of those activities I just mentioned, or things at the State House, we are always looking for folks to help join the coalition and serve on the leadership team in that capacity. So lots of options for folks. And with that, I'll turn it back over to the team.
Oh, thank you very much, Zandra, Senator Altschiller, Representative Muse. That was excellent, informative, and really galvanizing. We have probably 5 minutes before we go ahead and try to close out for the evening with a call to action. So I was wondering if folks have questions. We probably don't have time for a ton, but it would be great to hear if you'd either like to put them in the chat or feel free to raise your Zoom hand. we'd welcome a question or two for any of our panelists.
Ward, do you have a question? Oh, your hand was up. Okay.
I do have one question, which is, you know,
Sure.
for Senator Altschuler and Representative Muse and Zandra as well. That was a long list of losses, and I can imagine it becomes demoralizing at times to put bills forward and to see them killed, or to see so many bad bills coming out, especially in the House where there's such a slim margin between the majority and the minority. So I'm curious, how do you keep up the fight? How do you keep the faith and continue to press forward against such odds?
Because we're not doing it all by ourselves. To be, I mean, it is genuinely a team effort, and we are putting the bills forward because that's the position we're in, to be able to write this legislation and put it forward. But it's not just us. It's everybody here on this call, and Zandra pulling together the coalition, which is enormous. The coalition has health professionals, public health, mental health. We have coalitions of NAMI and the New Hampshire Medical Society, and the former founder of New Futures. And we have been pulling people from all across the state that have, you know, it's like it actually is a snowball. When I would first go to these hearings, there'd be just a handful of people who were there to testify in favor, because they felt it was a losing battle and dangerous. And now, I think I put it in the chat for everyone, when we had a press conference and a rally at the beginning of the session, and, you know, there were a couple hundred people who showed up to line the halls and hold their legislators accountable and go meet people in Concord. I mean, it's one thing, you should definitely talk to your state reps and me when you see me in the supermarket or anywhere, because that's the whole point of the reason New Hampshire has so many citizen legislators, is that easy and never-ending access. So do it. Like, I've actually cornered the governor by the strawberries at the Epping Demoulas, and I'm not ashamed. I will do that anytime, because that's what that's what we do.
Yeah, that's what democracy looks like.
That's
Representative
what
Muse, any
democracy
thoughts from
looks
you?
like.
Yeah, I think one of the things we have to realize is, especially with a Republican majority and a Republican governor, this is an unlikely fight for us to win, but it's an important fight for us to keep having every year. And I think one of the things we've managed to do through 2 consecutive Republican administrations is to actually build momentum for these issues to a point where we even have a chance of passing something like HB 1711, the mental health reporting bill. So, I mean, what I do, and where I kind of take my inspiration, is from things like, well, actually, Senator Altschuler's bill. As of last Thursday, we are sending a bill that will actually make the marriage age in New Hampshire age 18 finally. That's a bill that Cassie Levesque, Senator Altschuler, and other people have been fighting that one for, you know, I think Cassie's been fighting it since she was a 16-year-old Girl Scout, and now she's in her 3rd term in the legislature. We've had fights over the years with things like the Martin Luther King holiday, with gay marriage, and probably one of the most memorable ones for me was in my 1st term was when we sustained the veto, where we overrode Sununu's veto of the death penalty, and so we actually got rid of the death penalty in New Hampshire. That was a fight that took place over 40 years. I hope it doesn't take anywhere near this long to pass this legislation again, but this is the kind of commitment that you need to have. And, you know, and one of the things you need to realize when you're doing this as a legislature is you may not be the guy, you may not be the woman who actually gets these bills passed, but what you can do is you can help build momentum, you can help get the legislation into better shape than it was before it came to you, and you can increase the chances that the people who come after you can finally get the job done. And so if that's all I do, I'll be personally disappointed. But the reality is if we're doing that, eventually we're going to get there.
Well, your reference to the successful repeal of the death penalty in New Hampshire reminds us all here in Hampton of the tireless advocacy of Representative Rennie Cushing and all the work that he did on behalf of that issue. So I think he is, and you are all a really great example of what years of dedicated advocacy can accomplish. It's not about what we can pass today or tomorrow, but what we're building the foundation to pass 5, 10, 15, 20, 40 years down the line. So
Wow.
that's really powerful. Question.
Or in 2025. We'll take 2025 too.
That would be great. Let's do that.
All
Yeah,
along the way.
2025.
Any other questions before we close out for the evening?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, great. Jerry Zanoy here. I've listened carefully, and I must say I am very disappointed in our ability to solve problems here in the United States. I'm born and brought up here, but I mean, when you see automatic weapons, 100 rounds a minute allowed to be purchased by a family, unacceptable. Unacceptable. When you see parents not securing their firearms and kids are going out into the school or into public with guns, they should be absolutely complicit in whatever happens as a result of that. And background checks have to be really thorough. I don't care if they have to take 30 to 60 days to do them. Get letters, written letters from parents, from church people, pastors or priests, from school teachers and superintendents and principals. Find out about that person before you give them allowed to buy a gun. I don't care how long it takes, but we've got to get tough. We've just got to do it. And because we haven't been able to do these three big things, people have become full of thoughts and prayers every time it happens. Thoughts and prayers. How many times do you hear it? I'm sick of it. I want to see action. I want to see people doing their jobs, putting things in place to stop this stuff. Then just start thinking about the NRA and what are they doing? Is the NRA, lobbying and contributing to the re-election funds all the time? And this is why we don't get them through? Something needs to happen. I'll tell you, I'm glad I'm not a politician. I just couldn't do it. I'm an industry guy for 50 years. We went out and solved problems. Okay? When you don't solve them, planes fall out of skies. Rockets don't fire. Gaskets don't work as they have in the past on many of these things. We have to solve problems, and we're just not doing it. I see a lot of bills getting stopped, rejected, a few getting passed. So Mr. Sununu evidently is vetoing bills. I just don't feel the country's behind this movement. It really bothers me terribly. And I don't want to be passive and laissez-faire about the whole thing. But that's how I see it. People are just lay back and what the hell? Let's do more thoughts and prayers every day, every other week.
I gotta say, you said you're not a politician, but that sounds like a stump speech I would vote for. So
Yep.
I think you may need to reconsider because we do need that fire.
Yeah, I do hope you'll join the coalition and come to some of our organizing meetings and be part of submitting testimony, because that was fire. And to have you sitting in front of a committee and delivering that message is really, really powerful. So please hang on to that and bring that energy to the next committee, please.
Absolutely.
We need that.
That's a perfect note for us to transition to a brief call to action for this evening and to carry that passion with us as we move forward, because it is so important to carry that into this fight, really, really important fight we're going to have this summer and fall leading into the elections in November. So what can we do? The first and most important thing we can do is to continue to build connections with our friends and neighbors and families. Share the video of this forum, which we will post online at the Hampton Democrats website, and show your support on social media and in those good old-fashioned letters to the editor. So these kinds of issues are exactly the kinds of issues that us as members of our local communities should be sharing with our neighbors in places like the Hampton Union and the Seacoast Online here locally. There are so many groups doing this work. Both national groups like Everytown for Gun Safety, the Giffords, Sandy Hook Promise, March for Our Lives. And then, as Xandra shared, there are some amazing local groups like the New Hampshire Gun Violence Coalition and Gun Sense New Hampshire, which is part of Granite State Progress. And the great part of these groups is those are your neighbors in those groups, right? And they're looking for you to sign up and get involved. And there are so many ways, if you go to Granite State Progress, to get involved in these issues and to take direct action immediately. You don't have to wait. And they're waiting for you to reach out and to become a part of that movement. The other really important thing we need to do moving into those elections this fall is hold our elected representatives accountable, right? So just like we just heard, people are not making those tough decisions. You heard Senator Altshuler talk about her willingness to stand up to Sig Sauer and tell them that they need to take responsibility for faulty weaponry, right? That's something that many politicians in this state are not willing to do. They don't have that kind of political courage. So we need to hold our representatives responsible and accountable when they fail to vote for safety in this state and to keep our neighbors and to keep us and to keep our kids safe. So the Hampton Dems is tracking all of this for you. And I know also Xandra at Granite State Progress is as well. So when you see that one of your representatives has voted in a way that you approve or that you're disappointed in, if they voted the wrong way, you have to let them know. And you have to get your neighbors to let them know too. Just like Senator Altshuler said, when you see him in the Demoulas and you're waiting in the checkout line, that's your chance, right? Let them know how you feel. And really give them hell when you do that, because it's important for people to hear your passion and to hear how much you care, and also to hear how much you support their courage when they take votes to keep us safer. So yeah, this is a state that sends 4 Democratic representatives to Congress, and a state that Joe Biden won convincingly in 2020. There is no reason, if we organize, that we can't take this state and accomplish here what they're accomplishing in Wisconsin, taking a gerrymandered state that was rigged for Republicans from top to bottom and turning it around one vote at a time and taking back their democracy for the people who care about it. We can do that here in New Hampshire, but we have to work together, and it starts with this election in the fall. We can take back these majorities and then we can keep them, but we have to work together to do that. Along those lines, I would also just plug the meeting tomorrow night for the Hampton Dems, 6:30 p.m. at the Methodist Church. We'd love to see you there so that you can be part of that fight. And I'd like to turn it over to Ward now for just a little bit more in our call to action.
Okay, where did my document go?
This device isn't set up yet. To get started, download the Google Home app on a phone or tablet.
What was that?
Ward, I think you were going to share about the vote records.
Yeah, well, let's see. No, I just heard what I was just hearing, so that was odd. Yeah, from Hampton, yeah, from Northampton south to the state line. We have, of course, we have Democratic and Republican representatives and senators, and right, no, just one senator from the area. Everything goes on a party line vote. Democrats consistently vote in favor of the outcome that favors prevention of gun violence. Republicans consistently vote the other way, except for one HB 1711, the mental health reporting bill, where 2 of our Republican representatives voted with the Democrats, and that passed. Am I correct? There are so many things. Yeah, okay. Because,
Yeah, it passed the first chamber and we're waiting on the second chamber to vote.
okay, so yeah, as I was going through some of the data for this, and I'm not gonna spend a lot of time on this. It was pretty interesting where people voted and didn't vote, and looking at the voting records. And like I said, I think I mentioned in an email that the houses where anti-gun violence legislation goes to die, but we've actually done pretty well. So I'll pass that on and we'll
We
move
need
on from there.
fighters. We
Yeah.
need fighters.
Say that comment one more time.
We need fighters.
That's right. I couldn't have put it better myself. We do need fighters. And so the stakes are clear in this election in November. If we want to advance this cause, we need to elect people who actually have a commitment to do that, right? So when candidates ask you for your vote this summer and fall leading into November, ask them where they stand on this issue. Put it at the top of your list of issues that you care about, and only vote for the candidates who are willing to stand up and take the tough votes to keep us and our neighbors and our kids safer. So again, we have a meeting of the Hampton Dems tomorrow night. We'd love to see you there. We meet on the first Tuesday of every month at the
I'll be
Hampton
there.
Methodist Church. These are ways you can get involved, to knock on doors, to make phone calls, to address postcards and letters, to host a house party, to hold signs at the polls. There's so much work to do. And so we need so many friends and neighbors to step up and do it. So really, nobody else is going to make this happen. There's nobody else coming to pass this legislation for us, right? We have to do this. We're the ones we're waiting for. To quote President Barack Obama, change will not come if we wait for some other person or if we wait for some other time. We're the ones we've been waiting for, and we're the change that we seek. So thank you everybody for being here. This is action, being in an event like this tonight. It's hopefully the one step of the many you've taken up to this point, because I know so many of you have been involved for so long, and we hope that you continue to take those steps with us towards November and beyond. So thank you to all the panelists. Thank you, Carly. This was one of our first Zooms we got to do together. And thank you everybody for being here tonight. It was really a pleasure to see you. And thank you, Chris and the Hampton Dems, for putting this together. Good night, everyone.
Right.